button. All right, friends, we are live again. Today we're going to talk about our JSON extension methods for HttpClient, which thankfully I have actually written a spec for. So let me just go over the general gist. So basically the idea is this, right? You write some sort of code that encapsulates getting data from a server. This could be in a Blazor app or in any other kind of application where you talk to another server via REST. And so the idea is that very often what you just want to do is you just want to say, okay, go to this URL and then just give me the set of customers back that come from there as JSON. So the idea is that we have these extension methods that make that very, very easy. So you can just say get from JSON async, pass in the type you want to deserialize, and then good things will happen. And then of course you can have more complicated cases where you say, give me this URL that I construct by hand, and then same thing happens there. And then of course there's other words that you can have like put or post, and in that case we pass in the data that wants to be serialized to the server, and then we send it as JSON to the server. That doesn't work for all cases though, because sometimes you want to control a little bit more what actually happens on the wire. So in this case, imagine you want to extend something and slightly change the behavior, that instead of throwing an exception or something cannot be found, just returning null. So in that sense, you would craft the message by hand, send it to the server via the user mechanism, and then instead of calling the extension method directly on HttpClient, you would call it on the content object, because we also have extension methods directly on content. So instead of saying get as JSON async, you would say read from JSON async, pass in the type, and then we handle the deserialization for you. And then, of course, the same happens, with even more advanced cases when you want to send data to the server. In that case, we have a new JSON content type that works very similar to the other content types, where you just create one with a factory method, pass in the customer, and then simply send the request to the server via this mechanism. The key thing for all these things is that we make serialization much easier. That instead of you having to worry about the serialization and deserialization using the JSON APIs, it just become effectively a very simple method that just accept, effectively a T or an instance. The goals we have for this library is we want to have it available by build, because Blazor wants to ship stable by build, and they would like to take a dependency on this. And that's why we do this little fire drill here, because originally we just planned to do a preview by build, but it turns out they want to have that in the project template. So in that case, it has to be stable in order to, for customers to make sense of this. It's a bit weird if you have a stable product, but then the template that you instantiate has preview dependencies that you might not be aware of. That's pretty much the gist of it. And so I think at this point I would just look at the API surface, unless there are any more questions on how the feature is supposed to work. Seems like everybody is happy, or everybody is so disappointed that they don't know how to phrase it.
No, it seems straightforward.
The previous library had it was kind of more generic and supported branching off to different serializers based on content type. Is that explicitly not a goal here?
Yeah, so the original library that existed, actually let me scroll up because I forgot the name. Listed here? Yeah. So it's here. It's the Microsoft ASP.NET Web API client NuGet package. The APIs actually live in system net formatting or something, I think.
HTTP formatting.
Yeah, and so the existing library handled a lot more cases. It also had support for XML, and also had support for just deserialize and just pick the right deserializer based on the MIME types. For this one, we basically said we don't want to support that. First of all, XML is already fairly rare for REST APIs. And then secondly, it's like even if you wanted to add that, it would not the magic MIME type thing probably. It would probably just have different methods, like, similar to we have get from JSON async, we would have get from XML async. And then if we really wanted to, we could still add other APIs. There's like, get from, off T basically, and then, do this, basically do the dispatch in that method. So we could still add that later, but for now, the only thing we care about is JSON.
do have a couple questions, Timo.
Yeah.
First one is, so right now, you said that in the goals that we're targeting Net Standard 2.0, which is true for the Net Standard 1.3, the Release 3.1 PR. The question is, are we going to review only the Net Standard 2.0 surface area today? Because I know that we're going to multi-target in the runtime repo, also for NetCore 5.0. So are we going to review those APIs as well, or not those?
So I'm not aware of any API server that are specific for NetCore. If there are any.
Also, it would be
there are
just
overrides.
I see. Okay.
There are methods that we should override in .NET 5 that don't exist in Net Standard.
I see.
I
mean, overrides to me are. I mean, there's nothing to review really because it's an implementation detail realistically. So I guess I'm fine with doing that if that results in better behavior, of course.
It's only implementation detail if the types are sealed.
Well, it's implementation detail in the sense that you can't observe that as a difference between Net 5 and Net Standard 2.0. Like Net Standard 2.0, you just don't see the base method, right?
Right, which makes a base dispatch skip it.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, my other question was around why do we want to multi-target in runtime repo for NetCore 5.0? If it was because of HttpClient new methods, or if it was because of system text JSON new capabilities. But I guess we're not changing API, so it's not. I guess it's not relevant.
Yeah, there's some new HTTP client features that to implement.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
All right, let's look at the APIs.
All right.
Before we do, just a point of order. So the PR that David put up, I believe, started with basically this API surface area, and there have been a ton of comments on the surface area.
Right.
How do you want to deal with that?
I would hope they would bring it up here and just add it in the notes, and then we just change the API service based on that.
Like you want to run through what you currently have here, and then we can open the floor?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion. I mean, I don't know what happened in the PR because I kept tracking it, but it quickly ran out of, easy to use API PR because I already had 100 comments, I think, last time I looked at it. All right, so basically the idea is we have always overloads that take in the serialization options, but they're optional. So the idea is that you don't have to pass them in. One thing that was brought up in the PR that I remember from discussion with Stephen is that the way we have it right now, if you want to pass in a cancellation token, you have to pass in options because C# does not allow you to just vary the order effectively between optional parameters, which I thought it would.
You have to pass in options, or you have to explicitly name it. So cancellation token : cancellation token.
Right. Which is also kind of annoying because it's fairly long. The one thing we could do is you could just add another overload that just takes the cancellation token as non-optional, and then only have the long one as optional. But I don't have super strong opinions. Like if people think that cancellation tokens are commonly passed in, I think it makes sense. If they don't think it's commonly passed in, then I think what we currently have is fine.
It's probably more, from my point of view at least, it's probably more common to use a cancellation token here than it is with a lot of other .NET APIs that take them.
Yeah, how does it work in ASP.NET? Do you have an ambient cancellation token that kind of gets canceled when the request gets canceled that I can pass in, or?
Oh man, that's a very complex topic. So we have a couple. I think where we end up is we have a couple different cancellation tokens. We don't generally cancel the work that's been started on the server just because the client gone away, because those people who haven't thought about it assume that we would want that, but that's not usually the semantics that you want. I'm more thinking about cases like the Blazor case, where components might kick off some HTTP request in the background, but then want to cancel it if the user navigates away from the page. So it's fairly common. I wouldn't say it's every usage.
I see. So are you basically saying we should make it easier to pass in a cancellation token then?
Do we do this in other places?
I believe we have done this in cases where we have multiple overloads that we provided one where a cancellation token can be passed in easier, yes. We don't always do it, but we always try to make cancellation token at least optional. But there were cases where we have so many overloads that it will be a pain in the ass, similar to here, where it's like the last argument, and you have to pass in 4 other things.
So it seems reasonable to me that we would have them.
Stephen, what do you think?
It would seem less likely that you would want to like configure the options and you would want to pass the cancellation token, at least in the order of things. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one would be more common. I think that our serializer has some restrictions that apparently a lot of people are working around, like compatibility with JSON.NET, so it might be more common here than it would have in the past.
Yeah. Right, so I think we probably should add the overloads then, unless somebody has a concern with that. The other thing we have done is we have said we overload URI and string, because most of the time people have URIs in string form, and it's just annoying if you have to just say new URI passing the string anyway, then you might as well just have an overload for that. And that also mirrors what the existing HTTP formatting APIs have done in ASP.NET, because I think the sample code that we think people will write is pretty much what I wrote, above, where people want to basically have a very short one-line thing to talk to the server, and then if they need to customize more stuff later, like headers and whatever, they will do that. But you don't want to mess with URIs that much usually. So that's why we have effectively always 2 sets, one with the URI and then one with the string. Yeah. Sorry, was about to say something?
Yeah, so I was going to say, so I had some other questions / comments on these, and I guess we can just start with the get and go from there.
Yeah.
So one of my comments was, there's nothing about these that are really specific to HttpClient. They could all be extensions on the base type instead. Yeah, so that's one.
Yeah, I think we had a quick conversation. Ryan, I guess there was not really a reason why it didn't extend was it HTTP method invoker, whatever the base type is of HttpClient?
Yeah, I wasn't around when the original code was written, but if they're going to show up as extension methods you can call, like Stephen's suggestion sounds like an improvement. I don't think that was probably a question that was asked. I don't know. Maybe Jeff was around when this stuff was done, but I think everybody who worked on the original iteration of these has moved on at this point.
Well, I think if you're doing a post and you're getting a response message, you might actually want response buffering, like we do with HttpClient.
Why?
I mean, why do we have it in HttpClient today? I think it would be the same reason, right?
I guess. I generally don't know why we would want response buffering. I mean, it makes sense for the helper byte array and string methods. I don't know why it's a good thing for the others.
Well, in this case, you're returning a response message, right? You're not returning. It's not just returning a object that gets deserialized. So.
Says who?
Says the API service.
No, it doesn't actually. You could be which of these APIs lets me both send and receive JSON?
Oh, no. I'm saying that when you call post as JSON, you're getting a HTTP response message, right? So it kind of has the same general meaning as the HTTP client send async.
HTTP response message is what you get back from the base one as well, which has no buffering.
When you call send async?
Yeah, send async on HTTP message invoker, there's no buffering.
On the client, though.
On HTTP client itself, there's buffering by default if you call get async or send async.
Yeah.
Not if you call get stream async.
Exactly. And in this case, the return type is equivalent to send async. So I'm just saying there may be some real.
But send async on HTTP client gives you the option. This doesn't give you the option.
Correct.
Yes, Corey, what are you asking? Are you saying that because people would like to have that option, you can't implement it on the message invoker, or are you saying, we should do it automatically? Like I'm kind of, I don't know.
It depends on what people are going to use the HTTP response message for when they call post. Our current HTTP client send async by default will buffer the response. And if we had these as extension methods just for the message invoker, then there would be no buffering unless we added that feature into these extension methods also.
Yeah, I think that's orthogonal to whether it operates an HTTP client / HTTP message invoker. It's an implementation detail that we could choose to implement in these methods or not. Isn't it?
Yeah, I think we could. The question becomes, do we add another overload that says, do you want it to be buffered or not?
Sure.
And given that I modeled it of the formatting APIs, and I think they didn't have it, I'm okay with shipping without it for now. Because I mean, keep in mind we have to ship fast. So I would say whatever is additive, we can always do later.
I'd echo that slightly differently. I would think about these as very much like pit of success kind of APIs. So if somebody has requirements that go above and beyond what is put here, they always have the escape hatch to write more complex code. But we should use these APIs to give people the experience we want them to have, like by default for most scenarios.
So I mean, if the argument is that maybe if I could reframe the argument Corey's making, there are semantic differences between using HTTP client and HTTP message invoker just based on what's public and what's protected internal and whatnot. If the argument is 99% of people are familiar with the derived type, and therefore we want the semantics of these methods to have all the same defaults as that derived type, then maybe it makes sense to just extend HTTP client purely because it's going to show up that way in documentation, and so there'll be symmetry.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we just look at what Ryan just said, I think they probably might make the most sense because I don't know, like people who use message invoker are probably writing more low-level code, and I'm not sure they use these APIs to begin with.
Yeah, and you have the escape hatch of just using the JSON content type, right? If you're using the message invoker.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so we stick with HTTP client. So the next question was more of a comment. I think it's just typos, but this says nullable enabled at the top, but JSON serializer options doesn't have question marks. It should. But more relevant are the string request URI and URI request URI. On HTTP client, those all are nullable because HTTP client has a default base URI that it combines the one passed here with, and so if you pass null, it just uses the base URI. So that would suggest, presumably, we want these to be nullable as well.
Yep.
I would agree.
I'll make those changes. Yep.
So that goes for all of them. Then next up for the post as JSON async ones, the order of type and value is reversed from what the JSON serializer takes. It takes value then type. These take type then value. Is there a reason for the difference in ordering?
I don't think so. I think we should do what the serializer does.
Yeah, I think I just, again, modeled it off whatever the formatting APIs looked like, and I think they took it in this order. Like, I have zero opinions on that.
There's also a difference in naming of the type parameter. I forget what the JSON serializer calls it, but it's like
input type.
Input type, yeah.
So, how often is it to have a different type than the value type?
So that's my next question, which I know is going to cause Jeremy and Levi to flip a bit on me, but I still do not. I don't get. I mean, I understand the security concerns, but it does not make sense to me.
Yeah,
I mean,
normally
the generic one solves the problem, but it has the exact same problem. No,
I
agree.
Normally,
that doesn't matter.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, we're all talking over each other.
So normally, if you have a generic and you pass in a T, normally we use the type information from the T, not the actual type from whatever .getType. And normally, if you take in a value, we use the type information from whatever .getType. So yeah, I don't think the type parameter is all that necessary here. Because if you leave off the type parameter, you're going to get the generic T overload anyway, aren't you?
What you said about the serializer is not true though, Levi. Like there's no API in the serializer that does a get type on a value, other than the generic ones that don't do value.getType, they do type of static type.
Right. My main concern here is that we're requiring someone to pass both the type and the value for what to me seems like a security concern where we're wiping our hands of it, saying we've done the right thing, but everyone in the world who calls this is going to then just do what we decided we didn't want to do ourselves, right? Everyone in the world, if they don't have the type they want, they're going to do .getType and value.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does system.text.json serializer serialize object type do? Like I thought that you could pass in a null type.
We didn't expose those APIs because of this quote security concern.
No, but when we spoke about this, we said that as long as the default behavior is to use the statically known type of the object, and you could opt into using the runtime type instead, that would be acceptable.
And then I think that was misinterpreted because there are both sets of APIs. There's the generic and non-generic, and the non-generic all require you to pass a type.
Right. So in the case where it's everybody who's calling that one is passing value.getType, like that is them explicitly opting into the risk of the polymorphic serialization.
How many people have thought through that, Jeremy? I would argue it's as close
I think
to
that
zero as we could possibly muster.
No, because if you write the simple code, you're going to get the generic one, and now it's giving you the static type, which is
That's
almost
very simple
over.
code based on what? I mean, someone could have an object. There's nothing that says that this is strongly typed in the call site.
I mean, anywhere that, like, yes, you could have something that took object as a parameter that you're passing into this, but almost always that I can think of that you want to write something, you have a strong type of the value, which means that the generic one is going to pick the static type of that expression, and it's going to serialize it as whatever var would have done.
Then why have the non-generic one at all if it's never going to be used?
If you're not a framework, that's true. But if you are a framework, then you don't have the actual type category.
Right. In which case you're gonna call .getValue
Every time.
The one that takes a type expression is for if you are in complicated generic worlds or you took object and you want to control your fate.
So
I'm fine with controlling your fate. I'm fine with having a type value a type object overload, but I don't understand why we wouldn't expose just the object overload.
Yeah. What do we think of making the convenience methods that put as JSON async only be generic, don't expose just an object overload, and force you to use a JSON content if you're doing that rare task?
It's annoying on purpose.
Because I think the overwhelming majority of users will probably be using the generic overload.
Yes, we want to direct people to the generic overload as much as humanly possible.
I don't think people choose to use non-generic methods if there's generic if they have the type in hand. It's about the other case, right? When you don't have it in hand.
The thing is, and this is what Jeremy and I were saying, if you don't have the compile time type in hand, then you yourself need to make a decision as to what the caller meant to do.
And if you don't have the compile time type in hand, what is the caller going to do? The only thing at their disposal, 99.99% of the time, is to call .getType.
Generally, that means that the API. Generally, that means that the caller is doing something wrong. Honestly,
and I concur.
Yeah. If the caller doesn't have any static type information at runtime available to them, generally that means the caller has done something incorrect.
They have types available at runtime. .getType.
This is a consequence of the fact that we said we'll do. The fact that we're doing opt out on serialization information instead of opt in means that somebody has to. This is the consequence of that decision in the serializer.
So I think Corey, did you say you could use JSON content if you in the rare case where you actually did have an object?
Yeah, I think that if we want people to use the generic type and the generic overload, and if that's the one that people will be using almost all the time, then let's just have the generic overload and remove the object one and force people to use JSON content if they have that super advanced situation where they have an object.
Do they know? What happens if someone calls the generic one and they happen to have object? What happens?
They'll get an empty object serialized.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pit of failure too.
They won't get an empty object. Object is treated as polymorphic explicitly. Is that actually true?
Yes, it is. On the serializer side.
Oh, yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's the behavior you want then.
Yeah, so that seems fine to me.
Yeah. So remove the object type one entirely, and take Corey's suggestion of just use JSON content if you really, really need it.
Although then I'm going to have the same debate about the JSON content.
Yeah, it seems like you just de-invented your argument. Like if you're okay with that, like
what I'm saying is the system text JSON serialized APIs are what they are. Like have HTTP client exactly mirror the API surface that we already exposed in system text JSON. Like we shouldn't take this opportunity to be reinventing what the JSON serializer does or what its API surface is. What we should do is we should either expose the same API surface or a subset of it. Like we shouldn't expose a broader API surface.
This is for a different audience, is it not?
I don't think it is.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, honestly, JSON serializer was designed also very similar, right? Like the idea was that we make it very easy for people to serialize and deserialize stuff with effectively a single line of code, right? And so now we're just saying, oh, the same audience also wants to do this over the network. So how about we give them the same ability of doing a GET request and deserialize at the same time?
All right, well, I'll take it as a win to only have, to be able to pass an arbitrary object and not have to call it .get type, which is what having the generic does, because if I can just pass object and it just works, then fine.
Yeah, I mean, again, generally, if you're doing that, something is probably wrong at the call site, but whatever. If we made it work, we made it work.
people have these cases all the time in their code. Like I think we really underestimate the amount of code that users write in applications that is magical or involves some reflection or some indirection. Like not just frameworks. People have.
No, I agree with that.
You're gonna force.
So like we can't.
I'm
completely happy with the resolution, but I'm unhappy with statements like something is wrong in your code. Like people do this. But not with that said, I have to go to another meeting. So
turns out my mute state was opposite of what I thought it was. All that we really wanted is if you have a static type, we want to serialize as the static type, and that's where if you didn't, and therefore you have object, that's why it's like fine. The only thing this could do is either nothing or be the polymorphic that is probably what you wanted if you had object. Though it's semi-polymorphic because it's only one level polymorphic.
I guess the question then becomes, is there a purpose to it being generic rather than just taking an object? Are we gaining something there?
Right. If you have a static type, we serialize and deserialize as that static type. I guess deserialize always requires a static type, but we serialize statically when the static type is known.
Yeah.
Corey, I didn't get your question, Corey.
So I think having only a generic overload right now will allow people to specify the T explicitly if they have a type, if they're passing in a value of a different type. But I wonder how common that would be. Maybe that's an escape hatch we want to give them, but it might also make sense to not make this generic and just take an object.
I think there are two downsides to that. One is the one that Jeremy was citing, which is if someone does have a user, but it happens to actually at runtime be a user with payroll information, then with it statically typed as user, if we cast it to object, then we would end up serializing the user with payroll information, whereas if they have a user, they probably wanted it as user. The second one is we it's probably a minor one given everything else that's going on in these, but it's perf, and that is we'd be forcing it to be boxed when it wouldn't otherwise have to be.
So does the serializer have a version that does not take an object that's strongly typed and won't box its own arguments?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know about the boxing part, but it's certainly strongly typed and uses that static typing information.
Yeah, and that's why I was also saying earlier, like we shouldn't expose APIs that deviate from what JSON serializer does. We should expose either the exact APIs or a subset of them, but we shouldn't invent a new calling pattern now. If we want to invent a new calling pattern, we should do it on JSON serializer itself and then backport it over here.
Sure.
All right. So what I'm hearing is we will remove the. So basically, are we saying that removing the overloads that take object and type?
Yep.
Okay.
From the put post methods.
From all methods, right?
Not from JSON content.
From the extension methods.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. All right.
The get still wants it, right? Because deserialize always requires type. Yeah, the get still needs it because and there's no value being passed there. It's about how to interpret the type coming back. Yeah, and then the posts
versions of get there too, right? If we have the generic version of get, do we need the get that takes the type?
It's a slightly different situation. I don't know how common it is, but if you don't have it like as a static type T, but you have the system.type for it, if you were to just call the generic one with object, you'd get the wrong results because the deserializer would have no idea what it was supposed to deserialize it as. So you have to provide type information somehow, which means either a generic type parameter T or a type object.
Is there a way to get the deserializer just to give you back a dictionary or a property bag or something?
Ask for dictionary?
No, but I thought that there was a built-in just deserialize this as like a JSON object type thing, or do you have to pass type of JSON object to it, or whatever it is? I thought that there was some like magical way to get it to just give you back a generic thing.
You can get a JSON element, right? But that's not deserialization in the sense of an object type.
But you should be able to deserialize it into a JSON element. Like JSON serializer, deserialized JSON element works fine. You just basically get a J object like type.
Okay.
Okay, so then I think the next piece of feedback was from Pranav about the naming of these methods and get from JSON async. I think he was proposing that what's currently used, which is get JSON async.
So by the way, that's only in Blazor's like experimental stopgap API that we have. It's the Web API client that does not have an equivalent JSON async because all you do is get async of T. And it calls formatter. They didn't have specific JSON or XML specific overloads. I think the concern somebody responded to me in that PR was that like get from JSON async sounds like you are reading an object that was JSON versus get JSON async sounds like you're trying to get a JSON string or something along those lines, like get the actual JSON, not deserialized from JSON. But like we've had like the Blazor APIs out there for about 2 years and people haven't had complaints about it. Then again, it's not super scientific because we've been telling people, hey, this is experimental and it's going to go away.
I had the same comment. We have currently get string async and read as string async. So get from JSON and read from JSON read slightly differently, but I also agree that it would sound kind of like you're getting the JSON itself rather than an object.
So I think that one argument I would make is like I think the original formatting APIs have the same naming that what Pranav is saying, and they are out for even much longer. So I think like they are definitely around for multiple years. So that's why I originally had them as get JSON async, but then I changed it based on the API review feedback we got last time, for the same reason that Corey is just quoting. But I mean, I have to
think
say,
the original read the content type, right? So they're just like get as instead of get JSON, because they can read from either JSON or XML or whatever else you plug in.
yeah, I forgot what the original naming was, but it was something. I think it was very similar. I thought it was get JSON async, but I think it's get as JSON async.
Yeah, it was like get as T or read as T, something like that. It wasn't
They definitely
JSON
have overloads
specific.
that had JSON.
There was post as JSON, but the get was purely content type based, unless I'm misremembered.
If only I knew where the fuck was on. I think it's on the.
I think Corey is right. There's no get as JSON or get from JSON on the formatting API.
If you look at APIs of and search for read as async, you'll see the content extensions there.
All right, let's keep talking now. Meanwhile, I will try to find the original one. I'm not sure that APIs of that actually has the right thing indexed. But I think I downloaded the package last time I did that analysis.
It is referencing the formatting assembly. I think it's the right one.
Do we have any other concerns, or was that it basically?
So our current content types, they don't use a factory pattern to create them.
Sorry, are we talking about JSON content now?
Yeah, I'm just trying to talk about like, okay, is there any other like you just talked about
just with the get and post methods?
Yeah, is that it with these overloads, or is there anything else?
I think that's it.
Very
do
minor.
We want to?
Minor, but for the T itself, is that a descriptive enough generic type parameter name, or would we want something more?
What does system text JSON do?
It uses T value.
What else would you do?
Do we want an overload that instead of returning a response message returns a type? So you would have put or post as JSON async T return value, T post value, something like that.
You mean have it do both directions, both the serialization and deserialization?
Yeah.
I had commented on that in the thread, and I think Ryan has suggested the general That's relatively rare, but when it's done, you just use the response message and the read as whatever.
Yeah, that's how you do it. I think I'm just wondering if we can do it better, because I think usually if you're posting JSON, you might be expecting a JSON response. And the naming of the T generic type might be different in that case if you have two different generics.
Right. And to the answer to the earlier question, the serializer uses the generic name T value rather than just T.
Should we rename T to T value? Is that what you're saying?
That was my suggestion, and then Corey's question would build on that. If we wanted other overloads that allowed you to specify two T's, it would be like T, I don't know, post
T
value,
content
T get
type
value, or T input and output, or something. T send, T receive.
T request, T response.
T request, T response, yeah. Which then begs the question, would we actually want, if we would ever potentially want to add those, would we want the ones that just send a request to use the same T?
Yeah,
so like if we're going to end up with T request, T response, then presumably we'd want to use T request, maybe? I don't know.
You got it.
And I think T value seems fine because, I mean, it is the payload, right?
It becomes ambiguous in the post scenario, though, whether the value is for the input value or the output value.
If we had a post that posts the object as JSON, expects a response of JSON, and then deserializes it immediately, then we need T request, T response.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I mean, maybe. I thought the conclusion was from the response part that it's reasonably rare to get data back from posts that you want to deserialize, that if you really need to do it, you can get the content and just say read as blah. And then that's where you would do it.
Is that rare? I feel like that's probably fairly common.
You're probably going to be checking the other response properties before you try to deserialize, though.
That was kind of what I heard from Ryan. It's like either you don't care about the result at all, or if you do care, you care, right? Like, and then you really need to do it.
Yeah, what would we do if for a non-201 post response?
So we've actually had a fairly popular issue that highlighted the way people are using HttpClient today is they prefer to not inspect the response message, but rather use the ensure success status code thing. That to me means that maybe they would want to not have a response message in return. They might want to just grab an object type or something.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think we can add that later. We can have like a minimum bar today. There's no reason to put it on now if it complicates things.
I mean, given that the caller cannot name the generic argument anyway, it's just more documentation within the overload than anything else. So even if we have to add an overload where you can pass in, two T's, it's fine. And that, I think, switches from T value to now T request, T response to just, make it clear where they go. I don't think that's that bad either. I mean, I'm always more concerned when, the caller can actually, utter the name, because then when you go from one overload to the other, that your call set no longer compiles. So for arguments, for example, that's kind of shitty, but I think for things like that are effectively just documentation, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I sort of feel like we would want a different method group for the thing that auto deserialized as well, because it is a different semantic, because it's going to throw on non-success codes versus the one that doesn't, which gives you the message and then you inspect the response codes. So it doesn't feel like an overload. It's a new thing. I think it has value. It's just not an overload.
Yeah. What sucks with that overload, though, no matter what, is that you can no longer use generic inference, right? Now you have to pass in two generics, right? Because we can't have, or you only have to pass in the return one because the input one is, inferred. There is no partial inference.
Yeah, so maybe if we don't already have it in this, like, do we have the gets on HTTP response message? Because then you could say, put as JSON async dot get from JSON, and then give. Now you only have to specify the one T for the deserialized T.
They're on the response message dot content dot. However, you're not getting back an HTTP response message from these APIs. You're getting back a task of HTTP response message. So you have to alter what you just said by adding it in a wait and some parentheses there.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, which is also why I think putting it on the content is fine.
All right. Well, right now it's a 2 or 3 liner, and if we come up with a clever way of making it a 1 liner later, we can do it later.
Right.
Agreed.
All right. So then, meanwhile, I was just digging around in the formatting APIs. It seems I may have actually fucked up, or I just did what Ryan told me over the wire, because I cannot find any get APIs that take JSON, which is basically what people said earlier. So it seems like if you talk about the naming, then what are the names that we want to have for these methods? So we said, shit, now it scrolls definitely here. So what should we do? Are we happy with the names currently, or should we change them to something else? Oh, there's a lot of strong opinions, one at a time.
I think the names are fine.
I like them as they are. Removing from does give me that feeling that I'm actually going to get some sort of JSON type object back, not my deserialized object. Yeah, just get JSON async doesn't feel right to me. Get from JSON. It does make me stop and think for a second, but then I land on the expectation that it's going to do what it's going to do.
Sounds good. All right.
I'm less. The get from JSON makes sense to me. The post and put as JSON, I'm not sure the as adds anything. Does it?
Those have historic precedence, so I guess that helps there. The API client methods are all called put as something.
I see. Okay.
I mean, if you squint, you can think of, a conversion is happening, right? I mean, clearly you're not sending an object to the server, right? So, I mean, clearly a conversion needs to happen, and we just put it in the name.
Yeah, I mean, and imagine we have that you do SOAP to some things and JSON to others, and you don't want to have to do a static invocation on these things if you use both namespaces. So the JSON in the name I think is good.
No, the JSON in the name makes total sense to me. I was questioning post JSON versus post as JSON, but I think I just in my head argued myself down from that, and that's if T is a string, then I think post JSON is probably ambiguous about whether that string just contains the JSON to be sending, or whether it's actually going to do some sort of transformation to convert it into JSON, whereas post as JSON makes it pretty clear that there's a conversion happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. The current extension methods use as well.
All right, so ignore me.
All right, great. So then we've done the names.
Done.
I mean, very close. I mean, we have 10 minutes and we're almost done with the API service. I'm actually surprised. I thought I'd have to rein in. All right, so now the content one. So it should be the same pattern, right? Read from JSON async, except this one is over HTTP content. So we are saying here we leave the type in and we leave the generic one, right?
So yeah, there are a few things here. One is the discussion around the type and value, and I think we were saying we would leave the, and if you just had an object, it would just bind to the create to the generic one. However, that does highlight that there's an asymmetry here between the generic and the non-generic. So for the non-generic, use the constructor. For the generic, use create methods. To me, it would be better if we had one or the other. So if we added non-generic create factories and made the constructors internal, or if we got rid of the factories and added back the JSON content of T. Otherwise, it's the argument from earlier was, well, if you can just pass in your value and we'll use whatever its typing is, and if it happens to be object, then we'll call get type. That doesn't work when someone just says new JSON content and there's no generic option, or when they say JSON content.create and there's no non-generic option.
Yeah, and passing in an object right now forces boxing if you're serializing a struct. I don't know how common that is, but
that's another comment that I had, which is it's not just passing it there, but the current shape of the public type object type property. Sorry, a public object value property. No matter what we do, it's going to require boxing. There's no way around that unless that's virtual.
I feel like serializing structs is probably kind of rare, but I wouldn't mind seeing a JSON content of T, because that would let us keep the current pattern of using the constructor rather than factory methods.
Well, the problem with constructors is you don't have type inference. Then the whole point, I mean, even in
yeah.
the original one where we had JSON content of T, I had the factory methods to avoid having you to pass in the arguments.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, you could argue that, I guess my concern is, the JSON content.create methods, they can be used if you just have an object, so they can be used for the non-generic thing as well. My concern with the constructors is primarily, are people going to even notice the create methods if they just say new JSON content and their only option is to pass in a type and a value?
So are you saying we should basically remove the constructors and only factory methods?
If yeah. If we don't expect people to derive from it, then yeah.
Well, yes. So I mean, I think the idea was that we would derive from it, right? The JSON content of T would be an internal type that we just use to avoid the boxing.
Oh, that's fine. You can make the constructors internal.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we use factory methods, then we could have as an implementation detail something that avoids boxing value types.
If we change the public object value property.
Yeah.
So if you have JSON content of create of T, would you still use would you call value.get type to get the T? Because how do you pass in an object at that point?
Yeah, I don't think so.
The problem is if all you have is like an opaque object type, it'll serialize as an empty object, right, without any properties on it.
No, if type of T equal type of object, that does top level polymorphic serialization.
Okay, fair enough.
So then my question is, so if we only have factory methods, do we then do we need the type ones at all, or do we only have the T ones?
I think Jeremy was making the argument that there are situations where someone has an object and wants explicit control over exactly what type it serializes as, and maybe wouldn't want or couldn't for some reason cast. I don't know. Jeremy, is there a situation for that?
So, like, I've just found, especially, and maybe it's, when writing tests and overly helpful things, that I've lost the ability to strong type things, and then the only way that you can call the generic is by grabbing the reflection and getting the method info and then calling create type. Like, it's annoying. But if you know the type that you wanted and you can't strongly type the call as far as the compiler is concerned, the non-generic one gives you an escape valve.
And we think that doesn't apply to the extension methods because the escape hedge is literally the JSON content type. That's fair?
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're in that complicated situation, then maybe you just can't use these new extension methods. And that's not all things are callable in all contexts.
The cases where that I can think of not having the type at hand is if I'm writing my own data access layer, that's just a real thin shim over top of this layer so I can do centralized error handling, things like that. It's not that big a deal just to drop down one layer and deal with content directly.
Yeah, and really it would be any other serializer or any other sort of AutoMagic data model layer that already has object and type. That there's no way for them to get it back to a strong type, especially if it's from a downstream dependency.
So I mean, the current shape of the APIs as they exist, like we could ship with both create and the constructors. I feel like my preference is to, if we're gonna have the create methods, I feel like we should probably have them for both scenarios we care about, because otherwise I'm just concerned people are going to do new JSON content and not realize they can use the factories.
Yeah, like I agree with that point. We shouldn't have both as public on this type, but we can make generic create and non-generic create, which would look like the serializer.
Yeah,
I think I'm fine
and then
with
if we do that, I think we should switch the order of the type and object parameters for two reasons. One, it maps better to JSON serializer. Yeah. Two, it means that the value is in the same position regardless of whether it's generic or non-generic.
I agree with that too.
Yep.
And we should probably rename type to input type, right?
Yep. And we should consider making the value property virtual.
I don't see a value property. Where is it?
The very bottom of the screen.
Yeah, it's indented in a way that is not helpful.
I thought it was more arguments to that constructor.
Yeah. The indentation is kind of pulling your leg a little bit.
I have an indentation-sensitive language parser in my brain.
I do too.
The semicolon after JSON serializer options equals null doesn't help.
Now, for object type property, what type should we use there for both scenarios, for the generic one and the object one? Should we use the declared one on the generic and the runtime type on the object?
You should use the type of T for the generic and the provided type for the non-generic.
Okay, good. So so that's fine. So, but the only concern with that is that now we're using runtime.
Sorry. Let me rephrase that. I was wrong. You should use type of T for the generic unless type of T equals type of object, in which case you should use get type.
All right.
So,
and then check for null.
The one question I have is Steven said he wants value to be virtual. Why?
So we don't have to, but if we don't, we will guarantee that we're going to box T every time.
But if its return type is object, you're boxing even if JSON content of T. It doesn't matter that it was virtual.
Sure, it does. It's a property. If it's as a property, unless we're going to have some sort of internal virtual that it calls to, which we could do, how is the T going to be communicated down to the base?
Well, I mean, but that's my comment of if we have, even if this has public virtual object value, because the caller is going to see it as an object, the derived type that overrides it is going to end up boxing on the return.
Well, in general, we're the caller, and all this stuff is in the same assembly.
So you're just hoping for devirtualization?
No.
No, I think what Steven is saying is that the problem is because it's an init-only property, right? So like if you derive from JSON content, you have a JSON content of T, that constructor has to do something, right? And so if this thing is non-virtual, then you can't make it lazy, right? Basically, the base type will always have to assign this thing, and that's when the boxing happens. Unless you, dispatch to a virtual internal method, right?
Oh, so you want box on demand instead of box on create.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can avoid the demand.
Okay.
Now that said, in the scenarios where this is being created, right, you're constructing a JSON content object. There's probably a stream being created. There's like request and response message. So, and if value types are rare on top of that, like maybe this doesn't matter and we could do it later. But as written,
I have zero
very complicated gyrations to avoid it. So I'm fine with it as is, but we should pay attention to it for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have strong opinions on the other. Like, I think that I agree with the general sentiment is given that what you do here is a network call, maybe, and I think if you send data to the server and receive data from the server, you're not very likely to have that many structs there. But
and we can also, if we only have the create methods and not the constructor, then basically no one else can derive from this anyway. And we can do whatever we want, internal magic, value can just call a value internal. That's virtual if we really wanted to.
Yep.
So,
yeah, I mean, well, I guess that does raise, are we making the constructors protected or private/internal? I know that the authors of the framework design guidelines and Steve feel one way about this, and Anders feels another way about this. So, this is the good old, do we seal the type?
Like, what could people do deriving from this type? What could they customize?
I mean, we're going to specialize it, but I don't think that it matters to anybody else. So I'm fine with saying we're going to make them internal or any form of non-public. It's just, that is a decision we make and not just a word that we type in the code.
can we just start with this as sealed? Have the 6 create overloads, whatever they are, the 3 non-generic, the 3 generic, and if it becomes an issue, unseal it and add constructors later?
I mean, if we do that, then we can't also derive an implementation, right? I mean, I would probably start with not making it sealed, but only having private.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, effectively sealed by having private constructors, or internal constructors.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I have no issue with that.
The other option is we go the whole, no, this gets back to Emo's argument about the factories and generic inference. Never mind.
Right then. I think I will create an issue. I will post in the APIs as we just discussed it as feedback, and then I think we can close that.
One more piece of feedback. Do we need string media type? How often do people need a custom media type? Can they just use the media type header value overload?
No, I asked that question, Ryan. He felt very strongly that you need to be able to pass in the media type. But
I think Corey's question is different. Corey's question is the type of the media type. Do you need to be able to specify both string and media type header value, or is it okay to just specify media type header value?
Exactly.
Oh, that you need the string-based one? I think that's just because it's just so common to have the string.
Okay. I would call out that string content class has 3 constructors, one taking an encoding, one taking an encoding and a media type, and the other taking a media type header value. There may be some benefit to mirroring that here.
Right, repeat this one more time slowly. It takes 3 things, you said?
So it takes an encoding and a media type as a string. There's one that takes just an encoding, one that takes an encoding and a media type as a string, and another that takes a media type header value. And the former 2 just create the header value for the user.
Yeah, and the encoding is what? System text encoding?
Yes.
I think I don't remember that we ever discussed the encoding thing. The only thing that Ryan said was the string one is so common that I would have it, and then the media type header value is basically for everything else. So I have no opinion whether encoding is important or not. But if encoding is part of type of the media type header value, it seems if you really need it, you can still do it.
So there may be some confusion caused by just having a string instead of an encoding and a string, because the header itself, it's just one header, So people may try to pass in a media type of like application/JSON, semicolon, encoding UTF-16, and will that work? Or is it just the application/JSON that will work, which is what the current string content supports?
In order for that to work, you need to create a media type header value that already specifies the encoding. The string itself is not going to work because I'm calling the constructor and that throws when you specify an encoding.
Yeah, so I'm just saying people may be assuming that they can pass in the full header value here, and explicitly taking an encoding type would help guide them to understanding that's not the case.
Oh, well, yeah. That will be a good way to explicitly tell that you shouldn't be passing an encoding on the string.
Honestly, like for these kind of things, my care level is almost 0 because if you do the wrong thing, you immediately get an actionable exception, right? It's not something where something doesn't work at all or whatever. Like, well, it will not work, but it will tell you why it doesn't work and it tells you what to do, right? So I think that's less of a concern for me. Like, it's more when you pass in a string in some magic format and then it no error happens, but then the wrong data gets sent to the server. That would be way worse.
So do we care about consistency then? I guess that would be the other half of the argument, is consistency with the current things taking media type values as strings.
Yeah, I mean, if your argument is like the media type is ill-defined as a string and we should only take the header value, I don't have much to say for that because I think the only thing I remember is that Ryan mentioned that string is common, but I don't know how strongly he felt about that. So we could just see, what we are doing with this. I mean, we could just say we start with only having media type header value and see what Ryan says. We can always add the other ones later, right?
So I'm looking at the current extension methods, and they don't take a media type value as a string.
Then I have no idea where that comes from. I mean, which one are you looking at? You're looking at the formatting one, right?
HttpClient extensions in the formatting assembly.
No, I think that's not what I'm looking at. I looked at the... Yeah, I looked at object content of T and object content. And then basically the only thing I moved was the media type formatter because that basically controls XML versus JSON.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that one does take it as a string.
And then I think object content, does that have anything? I think that, yeah, it has the same thing. It has string and it has media type header value, yeah.
I would prefer that we take an encoding just to have consistency with string content, but I don't feel super strongly about that. If other people think that that's just going to be so rare that it's okay to have some inconsistency, that's fine.
Am I seeing it right that we kind of have to choose between consistency with string content and consistency with the existing post async?
The current post async, it takes a media type formatter and a string, so I'm not sure how those two things tie together.
Oh yeah, it does take both at the same time, doesn't it? As opposed to a media type and an encoder.
I believe the formatter is just do you encode to XML or JSON or something else, and the header value is probably the header.
So a media type can have a char set which includes like the encoding type. You just have to call like the parse overload rather than like calling the constructor, and that should be able to like support both those things. So if we, in the string media type, if we simply call the parse API instead of the constructor, like you should be able to specify a string deformatted, text/JSON char set equal to UTF-8.
That's not bad. I think I could live with that.
Another way to look at this is that the JSON content type is going to be the advanced type. So forcing people consistency, forcing some consistency wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing because the people using post as JSON will never see it.
Well, then how about this? Let's start with just, because I mean, I don't like the idea of having like 6 overloads because we already have generic, non-generic, and then there's already overloads of various things. So how about we just start with we only have media type header value, and you construct that guy however you see fit, and you have to pass that guy in.
In which case, can we just have 2 create methods, one non-generic, one generic, that take either value or object and value, and that take a nullable media type and a nullable options?
I think that seems reasonable, yeah.
Which form of media type? The strongly typed one?
The strongly typed one.
Yeah, the media type header value version. Then you
Sounds
can do,
good to me.
Then you can do everything, and then if people don't like it, then you can add more overloads to it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, we are 30 minutes over. Then you can call it a day. Do we have any questions in chat? I haven't checked the chat in a while.
Stephen, did you feel like we got through the majority of the comments that were on the PR?
The API public surface area ones, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
I guess the only other question is Jeremy had a comment that implementing the .NET 5 specific overloads of the virtual methods on HTTP content. Do we need to review those APIs? Are we okay just saying that, yes, you can implement them?
In general, I mean, Emo can override me on this, but in general, we will add overrides willy-nilly, add them to the ref for the next release, and we don't take those through API review.
Yeah. I generally don't care about overrides.
Right. The only reason it would matter for this particular thing is that means that we now have a split ref, which means the contract's frozen. So
Right.
we either lie and say we don't have the overrides, which may actually mean we can't have the overrides because of API compat. But like that's the tricky case because this is a new package.
So who's
Wait, why is the contract frozen?
Because if I remember all of the diagrams that Eric and Emo drew on the whiteboard or drew on whiteboards, it's when you end up with a split ref, that's when you can get the downgrade from. You can replace the shared inbox version with the package version and get an API downgrade and get a missing method exception.
But I mean, overrides are transparent in NIL. Like, I mean, like it just means, I mean, you can always call a non-existing base because the NIL, they will skip it. It just means that when you derive from the type and you call base, you might get weird behavior, but you can't derive from these types. So users will not be able to observe that.
That's fair. I'm just like, that's the concern is making sure that we don't split the ref so we don't end up with the multiple train and downgrade problem. And figuring out what that means, or accepting that we have to split the ref and that the net standard 2.0 contract is frozen.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
it's worth validating. At the same time, like there are methods on JSON content that we cannot override here that we are definitely going to want to override in .NET 5.
Right.
And I think that takes precedence.
Yeah. Also, I would say, like to Steven's earlier point, we generally are very liberal with virtuals, and even though we know there is a versioning problem with virtuals where people derive from it, I can't remember a single case where this has been done. So I'm quite okay with saying, even if that results in some weirdness, I have a hard time seeing that this is a real scenario.
But to your point, Jeremy, it's probably worth knowing what's going to happen. So if we can test it, like it'd be great to understand if there's actually going to be breaks we need to be aware of.
Also, if anybody happens to have enough pull with the compiler team to get them to emit base calls to the base type instead of the base overriding type, that would just fix this problem with refs permanently. So,
I think we talked about this. They're concerned that it's a breaking change.
So is adding an override.
And just to comment on that, like, oh, sorry. So Eric is no longer, I think, in the call, but yeah, I think that the concern with splitting the ref is basically only when Yeah, you're splitting it for NetCore app as well, but you're also shipping the assembly inbox, which I don't think that it's been decided yet for this one. I think that's when the concern happens, and the concern, as you pointed out, Jeremy, is when automatic roll forward comes into play. So for this one, that's not yet decided, I believe. So it might be something that we don't have to concern ourselves with yet, but we should check with Eric, because I know that.
Jose, can you just help me understand the situation? So it would basically be, we put this inbox in .NET 5, and then we ship a new version of the OOB package that includes additional surface area, such that it doesn't, and in .NET 5 we add overrides that don't exist in the OOB. And then someone builds against that new version of the, someone then incorporates that OOB into their app and it overrides the one that's inbox?
So no, technically it's like, as long as you're recompiling, you're fine. Okay. That's what I meant with the problem is with auto roll forward. So like if you compiled against the Net Standard 1.3 asset, but then you try to run a newer framework, so let's say .NET 5, which has extra overloads, and then the assembly also ships inbox. So like somebody inside the shared framework is trying to call those new overloads, but your app config file like is tying back to the Net Standard 1.3 version of it, which doesn't have the overloads. So that's when mismatch can happen.
I see.
Yeah, so that is kind of like the broken scenario.
So the only overload we're talking about, I believe, is one that adds a cancellation token on the
There's going to be two, but they're both going to be in the same camp. One is when you're talking about, Corey, that adds a cancellation token. The other one will be the sync methods.
True. And the same ref difference already exists on the HTTP client APIs today. So I don't know if having that split on this JSON content type is...
Yeah, but HTTP doesn't ship in a package anymore, right? So like we have system HTTP packages, but just like for legacy stuff. So we don't keep revving it. So that would be a difference. In this case, we're still adding stuff into the Net Standard 2.0 surface area. So that would be the difference.
Yeah, this is really only a problem with things that are split or that are part of the shared framework and also ship as an OOB package and have a split ref. Unfortunately, every time we've put something both in and out of box, we've ended up splitting the ref and then spending 45 minutes doodling diagrams on a whiteboard figuring out what state we're in.
I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but this OOB package we're only doing as OOB as a temporary stopgap, right?
If we do OOB once, then we're fine. Like if we do OOB once and then never rev the OOB and only rev the inbox, then we're probably... Actually, I don't know how we do that. So disregard.
This is just so that we can have something for Blazor, right? Otherwise, it's .NET 5 all the way.
That's my question. Emo, do you have a sense?
So, I mean, the thing is, so what I asked Dan Roth earlier, like what the expectation is, right? We ship this stable in May, and then we ship another stable version of our stuff in 5.0. But between 5.0 and May, I can totally see us getting feature requests and then saying, oh, yeah, let's add this overload because people are already running production apps on Blazor, right?
Sure, but what about? Oh,
and then I'm saying,
what about post 5.0?
No, I think post 5.0, the way I would model this package is the same as immutable, right? It's like it's an inbox package. We can potentially rev it, but like we don't have to. And then this way you have to.
But when you say that, like when you mentioned that feature request would mean to add surface area, would that be to the Net Standard 2.0?
Yeah, it has to be because Blazor 3.1 will only be Net Standard 2.0. So unless we tell people like you only get the feature in Blazor 5.0, you have to wait 6 months. You have no way to deliver that to them.
I see. Yeah, that might make it yeah, we would have to think about that a little bit more, see what it means. But like ideally, if this is something that we're only going to ship for Net Standard 2.0 for Blazor, what we can do is just like create the package on release 3.1 branch and then just remove it in runtime repos, because in runtime repos it's just going to ship as part of the framework. But then that would mean that like every new feature that we have to create for Blazor for Net Standard 2.0, we would have to do it out of the servicing branch in CoreFX.
Is Blazor not implementing .NET 5? Not planning to or something?
In .NET 5, yes, it is. But in the thing that we ship in May is net standard 2.1 based. It's like based off of mono-WASM and things like that.
Okay.
But that said, like I wouldn't expect, I mean, even if there are feature requests, I think it should be fine to tell people like, hey, you can wait until like the end of the year. People have been making do with their own implementations all this while if they had to like unblock themselves. So like telling them wait a couple months is not too bad.
Well, I mean, like I don't disagree with you. My problem with these kind of decisions is that I like this to be a policy decision, not a technological, oh, that's the only thing we can do decision, right? So because I mean, if the bug is bad enough or if the feature request is urgent enough by somebody, like I think we should be able to do it. Whether we do it then is a different thing, but it's pretty bad if we say, oh, the API service ends up being frozen because of some technological choice. That's very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
So it won't be frozen until we inbox it somewhere. So if like we're fine with like shipping one version right now in release 3.1 because we're only going to ship out an standard 2.0 ref assembly. So yeah, there's going to be a split in ref assemblies, but that won't be shipped until we ship Netcore 5. So at least from now, we can ship a reference assembly for net standard 2.0, and then we can rev it, and we would only have to worry about this once we are ready to ship .NET 5, because that's when we would be inboxing. When we would be inboxing another ref, like a ref that's split.
So that's a good point. So Pranav, do you know what your story is? Like once 5.0 is shipped, are you planning on still adding, like maintaining the 3.1 thing, or is the expectation because of the semantics of current people have to move to 5.0?
Yeah, I think it'll be telling people to move to 5.0. We hope we don't have to like service 3.2 at all. Like our branching, our build is kind of like very, very fragile at this point. So
yeah. In that case, I don't care. Honestly, at that point, I would say, yeah, I think it's fine if we can rev the API service between now and November. And then post-November, I think it's fine to people like you have to move to 5.0. And then the only outcome is, okay, we may have some issues between previews, but that's fine. All right, then I think I have everything. Then I will post an issue for this API review. I will post the notes, and then once everybody looked at my notes and says that's what we want, I think we can merge.
All right, thank you.
Awesome, thanks a ton, guys, and then I see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.